Are we ready? I would like to welcome Peter Reddish. He's returning once again, as we've had him a few times in the past, and I'm sure many of you will remember his talk entitled Great Gains on the Old Silk Road. He has joined us this morning to talk about his 3-year adventure in the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific. Please give a warm welcome to Peter.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Morning. It's always a pleasure to come back to Shrewsbury. It does indeed, madam. 3 years in a tropical paradise. We've got Hurricane Ophelia sitting not very far away. And there are 69 days to Christmas. It's going to rain, it's going to be miserable, horrible, it's going to pour down. Just thinking ahead. Thank goodness you've got the U3A with all the groups to keep you occupied. But just imagine in the afternoon when you see that pounding down and the dogs paddle across the kitchen floor just after you've washed it. You sit down, you turn up the central heating, you make yourself a pot of tea, and you sit down in front of the television, thinking, I'll have a nice quiet afternoon as the rain beats on the windows. Oh dear, it's trumpeting. Or maybe a little bit of insurgency. Before you throw the remote at the television, just try one more channel. Oh, there's a travel program. Fantastic. Oh, but I'd love to be there on that beach. Just imagine sitting there. No Facebook, no Twitter, no PPI cold calls coming in, because there are no phone calls on this beach. There's no telephone access at all. What's more, there's no one else there. There's not a sunbed there. There's not a single German beach towel. Imagine having to cruise into these islands in a little boat like that, coming up an inlet to visit a village tucked there on the edge of the rainforest, tucked in between the sea and the forest. Or more open islands, still with the lovely white coral sand, patches of coral in the sea, lovely blue seas, lovely and warm. Oh, and it's raining outside. Or possibly going to live out on that atoll in one of those palm-thatched huts. Sea breezes wafting through. It's idyllic. Looking at the coral and looking at the fish that frequent those corals. I had been working in Uzbekistan, as you know, for 9 years. I'd recently finished, and I was down in South Africa trying to reassess my culture down there after so long in the former Soviet Union. And I was offered the possibility of going back in January to the Solomon Islands. And I was thinking about the Solomon Islands. This was a 3-month assignment to assist the Minister of National Planning and Aid Development. The Solomon Islands. Well, while we were thinking about going back, my wife and I discussed it with some friends down in Cape Town. We went out for lunch. And our hostess had had several buckets full of Sauvignon Blanc. She said, "Where are the Elements Islands?" Yes, where are the Elements Islands? Well, the nearest focal point is Australia. There's the equator. There are the Solomon Islands, going northeast out of Brisbane, stuck in the Coral Sea. There are lots of them. 900 miles of islands, 990 islands or more at the last count. 50% of them are permanently occupied. And there's a population of 566,000. 66,000 people live in Honiara, the capital, on the island of Guadalcanal. So there are 500,000 people spread over nearly 1,000 miles. How on earth do you run a health service over all that lot, looking down there? And here's a closer view, but there are some of the islands missing. Is it showing up? No, it's not. If you go way down to the bottom right-hand corner, there are more islands, the Santa Cruz Islands, which are about 2.5 hours flying time from the capital Honiara, just over there. I contemplated, I sought advice, I looked in various places for information, and the best place you can go is online to the FCO website, where they have details of every single country in the world. The average temperature, 28 degrees centigrade. Yeah, well, that might be the average, but when I got there, I discovered that it was 32, 33 degrees C every single day. The coldest I ever experienced was 21 degrees at night, and next morning all the locals were wearing duvet jackets. Humidity is horrendous. You get off the aircraft, it's like walking into a wall of, or a sauna, a permanent sauna. And rain falls any time. Well, the best time to do anything in the Solomon Islands is in the morning, because by afternoon it's going to rain, or it is raining. And 41.5 feet for the annual rainfall over on the Western Islands. And then the FCO tells you about the health facilities there. The National Hospital, the only hospital there in Honiara, runs out of the basics quite often. And there are mosquitoes. Malaria is rife. And very recently, they've had an outbreak of dengue fever. Never mind, I've read all that. What else do they say? Well, Guadalcanal, the main island, Honiara, up at the top, over there, the capital. And a map of that island. Oh, it can't be all that bad. The island is 90 miles long and 25 miles wide. It's quite a big island. And the yellow lines are the roads. Yes, those are the roads. I do not exaggerate. There are no other roads. If you want to get from one side of the island to the other, you either walk across through the mountains in the rainforest, which takes 2 days, or you take a small boat and travel all the way around the coast, dodging all the coral reefs and the surf, to get to Honiara. There are a couple of airfields, and when I say airfields, it's nothing more than bulldozed coral from World War II. Very primitive indeed. And we've looked at those roads, and way up here in the top corner, you just see that little red symbol up there. Well, that's the road at that point. Not exactly M6, is it? Oh, and by the way, it's in the Pacific Ring of Fire, where they have all the earthquakes. And there was one very recently in the Solomon Islands. It was a small one. What? And you can see lurking over, where are we? I've lost it with the light shining on me. Over there, the blue circle there. That's the earthquake that the last earthquake in the Solomon Islands. They have them regularly. And they had one last year, which was 8.0 on the Richter scale. I bet that rattled a few tin mugs. And that's the after effect. But it's not the after effect of the earthquake there, it's the tsunamis that they get. Now, tsunami is a Japanese word that's come into modern use. The Solomon Islanders have their own phraseology. They call them king tides. And at the merest sound of an earthquake, they're straight up the hills. Everybody just goes straight off the beach, way up into the hills, and sits there, sometimes for 24 hours, to make sure that they aren't clobbered by a tsunami. And that's where the tsunami, or a king tide, actually came through a village. That's taken about a week after it had been in there. Fortunately, nobody died. Oh, and the wildlife's interesting as well. Very interesting. A woman washing clothes in a river was snatched by a crocodile. A few days later, a member of the Australian police force, because they reinforced the Solomon Islands' own police force, went out and they managed to find the crocodile and killed it. And that's the sort of river and creek in which they live. Freshwater and saltwater crocodiles, and just look at those children paddling in there as if they haven't got a care in the world. Oh, and there are other exciting things. They mentioned the sharks. Yes, I was out fishing one day, hooked a nice fish, and a shark decided that it wanted it, so we had a mega tussle till it broke free. And if you fancy paddling in the sea off that beach, don't go too close to the coral because there are clams growing there. That's one of my size 9 shoes sitting in that clamshell. Can you imagine paddling there, your foot getting stuck in that clamshell, the clamshell closing like a gin trap on your ankle, and the tide coming in? But some of the natives are very friendly. Dolphins, masses and masses of dolphins, very friendly creatures. And they play around day in, day out, just like, aquatic Labradors. They're just like puppies the whole time. Fascinating creatures. Oh, and there's another warning, by the way. Beware of taxi drivers. No, they don't rob you. They're lovely people. They don't rip you off at all. Look at his teeth. Interesting colour. He hasn't heard about the whitening toothpaste available in the supermarkets. Even the children have teeth of that colour. It's because they chew betel nut. Betel nut is their form of chewing gum. It's an appetite suppressant, it's a mild narcotic, and the downside is that it creates an awful lot of saliva. They have to get rid of that saliva, so they spit it out. Betel nut is rust-coloured, so everywhere you go in the towns, the pavements are rust-coloured where people have spat out betel nut juice. Honiara in the past 6 months has banned spitting. It's taken them an awful long time. But what's that got to do with taxi drivers and the warning on the FCO website? It's quite simple. Through the centre of town is a dual carriageway. It's all of 6 miles long. You're driving down the road, there's a taxi driver ambling along looking for his next fare. You're in the outside lane, just about to overtake him, and he's chewing betel nut, and he wants to get rid of all the excess saliva. He doesn't wind down the window because it's already wound down. he opens his door and spits it out while he's on the move. So you take off his door and he takes off your near side wing if you're not careful. So having decided to go there, a sort of, oh right, okay, I don't believe it, but let's have a look. How do you get there? Well, you fly there, of course. The quickest trip I ever did to Solomon Islands, and I mentioned that I was there for 3 months initially, and then I was invited back for another 3, and then they twisted my arm and said, come back for another 2.5 years. Well, better the devil you know. So the quickest trip I ever did in that 3-year stint was leaving Manchester Airport on Emirates on a Sunday evening at 8 o'clock. 7 hours flying time to Dubai, 2 hours on the ground in Dubai, and on the flight to Brisbane for 13 hours. Arriving in Brisbane, in theory, 3.5 hours before the flight from Solomon Airways came to collect you to take you out to paradise. Well, Solomon Islands doesn't rely on clocks and watches. It relies on the sun. Has the sun gone down? Oh well, we'll go tomorrow. You never know how long you're going to wait for the Solomon Islands flight. The quickest I ever did it was 8 o'clock Sunday evening from Manchester Airport, arriving in Honiara on Guadalcanal, the main island, 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, having spent 5.5 hours in total on the ground. And I mentioned Brisbane, glorious city, one of my favourite cities. I could happily live there. And if the flight is delayed, then you leave the airport, you go into town and you go on a shopping spree. And you take stock of what you've packed and what have you forgotten. Oh, spectacles. Well, I've got 1 pair. Yes, and I've got a spare pair, which is a good thing because there isn't an optician in Solomon Islands at all. And while I'm at it, a decent pair of shoes. Might as well get another one while I'm there, because the locals either wear flip-flops or bare feet. And for the first 2 inputs I did, 3 months each input, I lived in a hotel. Way out along the coast, this is the whole of Honiara, the capital. And I was just down here on the beach. Used to have some glorious sunsets, ideal for sitting there having a cold beer. And one thing the Commonwealth Development Corporation did long ago was set up a brewery. And I'm delighted to let you know, ladies and gentlemen, that today it's still producing extremely good beer. After those 2 stints and going back for 2.5 years, I needed a house. So my house, fortunately, features just there at the bottom of the photograph. It is that one in the centre of the photograph, one of 5 up on a ridge, very steep ridge on both sides, just like a finger pointing out. 5 houses along it, nothing else could be fitted in. So we got the breeze off the sea or coming off the mountains. And that was my house, looking like a scout hut on stilts. On concrete stilts, concrete base, and the reason there's no ground floor is you don't need underfloor heating there, you need underfloor cooling, so it's to let the breeze blow through all round the building. Timber clad, timber framed, the walls inside covered in hardboard and painted. That was the view from one side of my house, looking up in towards the mountains, and that was the sitting room. Everything in local timber. Finding furniture there is extremely difficult. It has to be imported, or you wait for some expatriate who's leaving, or you half think they're leaving, and you nip round and see them and say, I hear a rumour you're leaving. If you are, can I have your dining table and chairs? How much do you want? And that's the only way, and you sit and wait for 3 months for a dining table and chairs. You will notice there that we have got louver windows, we've got a ceiling fan, and over this side here, we have an air conditioner up there, which is all very fine, providing that you've got electricity. Well, the electricity on the island is provided by diesel-powered generators. It is extremely expensive because the diesel has to be shipped from Australia, and the generators often break down. So that's why you sit up on the hill at the back of town so the wind can blow in any direction straight through your house, cooling it all off for you. One Sunday evening, my wife and I were sitting there on that sofa with a bottle of Australian Sauvignon Blanc. The television I'd just switched on. I had my own satellite dish. I could get Australian television. 6 o'clock Sunday evening, just switched on the television to watch the news. An earthquake hit. My wife said, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" She'd been through earthquakes before in Uzbekistan, but this was a big one. She said, "Let's get out." I said, "No, you don't get out." I'd learnt in Uzbekistan, another earthquake zone, that the first thing to collapse in any house with an earthquake is usually the staircase. So sit tight. So I said, "No, we sit tight." So she grabbed her glass of wine. We sat there. The earthquake did its business. Then it stopped. We looked at each other and she put her glass down and she'd never spilt a drop. At that point I knew why I had married her. And that's the view looking out the other direction, and looking out to sea. I don't know whether you can see it there because of the lighting, but there's an island over here, just off the coast, the island of Savo, which is an active volcano. It's nice to have one of those on your doorstep. And quite often you could see the smoke coming off it, and sometimes you could smell the sulphur. Now, one of the interesting things about Savo is that it is the habitat of the megapod bird, about the size of a grouse or pheasant. Looks a bit of a scruffy bird. It lays its eggs in the warm sand on the side of the volcano, covers them over and clears off. The chicks emerge fully fledged. Within a few hours they can fly, and they're on their own. Sometimes I wonder whether we could learn from the megapod bird. Could we have children that way? Whilst I was living in that house, somebody from the Australian High Commission said to me, "Peter, where do you live?" So I told him. He said, "I thought so. Do you know who lives next door to you?" I said, "Yes, it's Daryl. She's a very nice lady working for the Australian legal system, trying to support the Solomon Islands." He said, "Yes, but who's there?" I said, "Oh, she's got a partner." He said, "Oh, they got married in Fiji a fortnight ago. It's Dave." I said, "Yeah, I've met him very briefly. Good morning, how are you? Bit warm this morning, isn't it?" And that sort of thing. He said, "You don't know any more?" I said, "No." He said, "Go and Google Dave Everett." Well, bang, straight in your face, on Wikipedia, Dave Everett. Curiosity. Dave had been a member of the Australian SAS, their version. And when he came to the end of his term, he decided he didn't really want to return home, so he was over in Burma, and he started to help the Karen try to establish their own tribal homeland. And of course we know the tales of those horrible tales of those poor wretches fleeing into Pakistan at the moment in northern Burma after trying to keep their own homeland. He was helping the Karen. That's the tribe where the women have all the bands around their neck and great long necks like giraffes. He was teaching them how to blow up bridges and demolish various things and protest explosively. When he got fed up with that, he went back home to Perth. Well, it was a bit more expensive to live in Perth. He needed some money. So he held up a bank. Did rather well out of it. Decided he would leave Perth, skipped over the state borderline, went out into another state, met a couple of his mates, and the three of them then started to go around borrowing money from banks on a permanent basis. I'm living next door to an Australian criminal. Dave's ultimate was a gold mine. One Sunday evening, they decided to go and investigate the offices and the strong room of a gold mine. They put their explosive in place, retreated, set it off, and unfortunately, they got their calculations wrong. The decimal point was in the wrong place. They blew the lot up and scattered it over a 2-kilometre diameter area. He was known in Australia as Dangerous Dave, and you can understand why. Now the ultimate bit. He was the most wanted criminal in Australian history, and I'm living next door to him. To be fair to Dave, he was caught, he went into jail for a long time, he studied for his degree whilst he was in jail. He came out totally reformed and helped an awful lot on a voluntary basis. Sadly, a couple of years ago, at the age of 52, he died of cancer. But for a long time, having known this and knowing what was next door, I used to sit there in the evening and he would be playing his music, and he loved rock and roll music. His louver windows would be open, mine would be open, and the houses were about 15-20 feet apart, and Dave used to love his rock and roll full blast. Do you know, I never went round and complained. And that's enough of my house, so let's look at a village, and you can see the house over there up on stilts, the children coming out of school, all in school uniform. You see children playing in ancient dugout canoes, and look at these, nothing more than toddlers. Is it any wonder they fall victim to sharks or crocodiles? The women doing the washing in the streams, the drinking water coming from those streams off the mountains. Cooking, very simple, an old oil drum as a stove. And the most glorious, tidy villages. Honiara is a tip because no one has any ownership there. Lots and lots of people have come from the outer islands. They live in squalor. They have no ownership at all. They just dump their litter anywhere. In the villages, it's different. In the old British colonial days, the colonial boss used to walk around the villages every Sunday afternoon, and he'd be telling them to tidy up this, tidy up that, fill that hole in the road. Even today, the village headman goes round and tells them, tidy this up, tidy that up, and that's the result. Lovely, tidy gardens. Solomon Islands were discovered by de Mendes, a Spanish sea captain who had 3 ships. He went over to the Solomon Islands and went right on to the northern tip of the Solomon Islands, looking for water and fresh food, was chased off by the locals. He moved down to another island, started to talk to the locals, and at first they were reasonably friendly. He wanted to buy some pigs and they wouldn't sell them. The only thing he was offered was a carcass. They took one look at it and recoiled in horror because it was the carcass of a child, because the people there were cannibals at the time. And so they sailed on. They went right down to the far south of Solomon Islands, desperate to get food and water, heading due south. They must have travelled about 700 miles from where they were offered the human corpse. They came ashore on a lovely island. The natives were friendly. They found a spring, so they were getting their water from this spring, filling all the barrels on board. They camped on the banks of the river. 2 weeks later, Mendana died of malaria. It was a British protectorate, and in 1978 joined the Commonwealth. Now, in any Commonwealth country, you have to have a certain order. And the first thing you have to have is a language. There are 80 different tribal languages in Solomon Islands. Someone from the north cannot speak directly to somebody from the south unless they have a common language. And their common language is Pidgin. It's their own version of English. And now I'm going to take you on a little language course. The head in the Solomon Islands is a lady whom unfortunately I didn't meet while I was there. In fact, I haven't met her at all. Mrs. Quinn. You're learning Pidgin. The next one is an interesting one. Number 1 picking belong Mrs. Quinn. Number 1 child belonging Mrs. Quinn. But my favourite is canoe belong Mrs. Quinn, or it used to belong to her, Britannia. Every single ship, whether it's a dugout canoe or a massive container ship, is known as a canoe. And as you travel around the countryside, you find lots of militaria. The Battle of Guadalcanal in World War II, the Americans and the Japanese. You find things like this. This guy is obviously expecting the mother-in-law to come round for Sunday lunch. He's prepared. Not only has he got these guns, but just over here, over on the right-hand side, he's got a cannon poking out as well. Well, she's been there before, because she's turning up in this armoured personnel carrier. They literally lie there all over the place. And this island, Plum Pudding Island, a lovely spot way out in the west, beautiful sandy beach, nobody lives on it, it's too small, there's very little water on there apart from rainwater, glorious views looking out across the sea to some of the other islands. And in 1943 there was a Japanese convoy nicknamed by the Allies the Tokyo Express, bringing goods, supplies down from Japan to its troops in Guadalcanal, surrounded by destroyers, and the Americans had some ships around there as well. They sent out a couple of patrol boats to try and disrupt this convoy in the evening of the 1st of August, coming down this very sound over which we're looking. Unfortunately, one of those patrol boats got hit by a destroyer, which drove over it. It sank, several members of the crew died, the others managed to stagger ashore onto Plum Pudding Island, hid in the trees and were rescued 3 days later. The captain suffered from a badly damaged back. The ship that sank was captained by JFK to become the President of the United States, and he suffered from back problems for the rest of his life. They were rescued 3 days later. As a result, that island is now renamed Kennedy Island. Honiara, the capital, I mentioned the fantastic dual carriageway through the centre of it. That is it. And the shops, well, no opticians, you think about shoes. There's one, and what I love is the sign up there that says they're part of Tiffany's. I don't know whether Tiffany's in the United States are aware of this. Another shop there showing the full range of things, and you will notice the locals, all in shorts and t-shirts, all second-hand. Every month, bales of second-hand clothes come in, usually on the ship on a Thursday. Friday, at crack of dawn, there are massive crowds around all the Chinese shops as they begin to undo the bales of clothing. The expatriate wives usually go down there to look at what remains of the bales on a Tuesday, when they've been thoroughly sorted out over the weekend by all the locals. A good friend of ours got the most magnificent evening dress for £2.50. Second-hand clothes are given to charity in Australia, New Zealand. The Chinese seem to get their hands on them somehow, and over they come. And you'd be amazed what you see walking down the streets there. You see a Manchester United supporter, and he hasn't got a clue where Manchester is. You will see t-shirts from charities, all washed out, faded, battered, some of them torn. Most incredible range. But one day I was walking back from the office down to the hotel, just after I'd arrived in Solomon's, and there was a young lady coming towards me. She was amply endowed in the pectoral regions and in a very tight t-shirt. It was a navy blue washed out t-shirt, and as she came closer I looked at it, took a second look, and I didn't believe it, because in faded lettering across her ample front were the words orgasm donor. I didn't believe it. I had to turn round as she went past, and on the back was a chart, but it was so washed out I couldn't see whether it was a series of phone numbers or a tariff. Obviously some parent in Australia had seen their 16-year-old's daughter or son wearing it for a joke and said, "Take that off, put it in the bin." And so it ended up in Solomon Islands. Shopping there? Yes, the Chinese stores or in the markets, fruit and veg everywhere, available all year round, everything fresh, very little frozen because it's so expensive to bring it in. The only thing that we used to buy that was imported was meat, because there are no cows in Solomon Islands. They had a civil war about 3 years before I first went there, and they ate all the cows and nobody's dared to put any back in there. The market, lots and lots of yams, greens, plenty to buy, and on Saturday mornings they have the most magnificent flower market. Orchids, masses and masses of orchids. When my wife wasn't there, I still used to buy arms full of flowers, literally, masses of orchids, and plant them all around the house. They were glorious. And looking at one of those bunches there of the orchids down at the front, that great ball of orchids there, that would cost about 25 pence. For £2 or £3 you could do your house for a week. And if you wanted fish, well, it's simple. Get down to the waterfront and get yourself a red mullet for the night. Sorry, a red snapper. Or go out and catch your own on a Sunday morning. A lot of the work in which I was involved with the Ministry of Development was the money that was coming from the European Union, European Commission. I'm not going to go into Brexit arguments at all, but one thing I will say about the aid funds that go out to these places are that they are so tightly managed, like the negotiations going on where they're hardly lurching, making any progress at all. it's so difficult to get the money and then to be able to deal with various activities under the development programme that there's very little chance of it falling into the back pockets of the locals. Unlike World Bank funds, for whom I have worked, where the money is paid into a local bank with the locals running it and lots of hands in the till. EU funds are so badly managed by the sheer lack of speed and urgency that it's very difficult to draw any money. The Solomon Islands was assessed when they were having the Civil War. The date was chosen on a worldwide basis, and Solomon Islands did extremely well because of the Civil War and blowing things up, such as bits of the harbour and the bridges and the water supply and all that sort of thing. They didn't have anything at all. They had no exports. They were awarded 101 million euros for their development. So, how would you start to spend some of that money? Well, when I first went there, Solomon Islands had major shipping problems. They didn't have lighthouses. The islands are all surrounded by coral reefs, extremely dangerous. There's no way you could sail with large vessels through the Solomon Islands at night. So the first thing we needed was navigational aids. So a total of 10 million euros was spent putting up beacons, buoys, right round the islands to enable shipping to come into the main port of Honiara 24 hours a day. And schools. That is a typical school. It looks lovely in the sunshine, but can you imagine the rain beating down on it in a tropical storm? That's how schools should be. Yes, it's wood. Looks expensive. The EU contributed to that school. It contributed to a lot of schools. But it was done on a village basis, and the locals had to provide 50% of the total cost. They didn't have the begging bowl going around the village. They could do it payment in kind. They provided the land, which was valued at a realistic rate. They provided the labour. They provided the timber. And the EU provided the other 50%. One thing that it did was that the locals felt they had ownership. We built that school. It wasn't as if some charity had come along, as often happens in Africa, in my experience, built a school, said, there you are, here are the keys, we built you a school, goodbye. And then the locals sit there and say, well, we need so-and-so. They go around to the charity and say, your school needs this. Sorry, the school was for you. These villagers are extremely proud of their schools. They also have water projects. Piped water coming into a village. Fantastic. Instead of having to draw the water from the stream and not knowing what's in that stream. This particular one was a stream that was dammed way up the mountain and a pipeline laid from that reservoir coming down here, so they have water for showering. The big advantage of the villages owning them, look at the taps. Nobody's tried to steal them. They're village property. If it was said, no, that was provided by the European Commission, somebody would have stolen the taps thinking, oh yes, the European Commission's going to provide some more. They'd had to find the taps. So let's go out and look at a real project. What else was being done out there to stimulate the incomes in the rural areas? Well, there's Honiara, ringed in red. And we want to go way up there to Wagina, where there was a big project in operation. Wagina, way up the New Georgia Sound, or it's nicknamed the Slot. A long way away. I was going to go up there with two of my office staff, and I said to them, how long would it take to go up there by boat? And they said, Oh, it's about 3 days and 2 nights. I said, well, that's not bad. If we get, when does the boat go? Oh, well, the next boat might be going next Thursday. I said, well, that's fine. Can we go on it? Peter, you don't want to go on the boat. Yeah, of course I do. I'd love it. See more of the islands. Peter, we aren't going on the boat. I said, why? At night, it's crowded, it's noisy. I said, that's all right, we'll have some cabins. Peter, how long have you been in the Solomon Islands? Why? Haven't you heard cabins are reserved for bishops and pigs? Well, bishops I could understand, but pigs, and then it dawned on me. Yes, they may not have cows there, but they have pigs. Pigs are very, very valuable and are only slaughtered for weddings. No other time. If you're going to steal anybody's riches, nip round at night and steal one of his pigs. They actually put the pigs in the cabins to keep the sun off them. Not such a good idea. Okay. So the dream of setting off into the setting sun on a boat like that for the next 3 days. Sorry, we're going to have to fly up, and the nearest airport on a regular basis is there in Giza, the capital of the Western Isles. The flight up from Honiara is 2.5 hours, and that's Honiara domestic airport. Marginally improved from World War II days. And that's the aircraft. None of the Dreamliners, the A380s with a bar at the back and all that comfort. 2.5 hours going up in that. And that's not the airfield we're going into. That's another neighbouring airfield on which it lands. But as you see, at the end of the runway, there's the sea one side, the sea the other. The saltwater crocodiles one end and the sharks the other. Grass-covered strip on flattened coral, no landing lights. The only contact the pilot has with the ground is radio. If you're going up there and it's getting dark or the weather's bad, the chances are they'll refuse to land. They have to go back to the capital, Honiara. That's the only airfield in the entire Solomon Islands which has navigational aids and proper lights. So we're going to go into Giza, which is up there in the top left-hand corner, the town of Giza. The only problem is, its airfield is over there at about 2 o'clock on the right-hand side, looking like an aircraft carrier. It's an old wartime airstrip, where an island was bulldozed because there was nothing else suitably level for them on which to do it. And you arrive there at Nusa Tupi Air Terminal. Not much difference between that and Terminal 5 at Heathrow. You walk round the back of that terminal and you come out onto a pier. That's a World War II jetty, where you get in that boat and you have a 20-minute trip round the coral reef, arriving in the town of Giza, capital of the Western Isles, and that's the main street. And there's our hotel. Well, that's only the entrance to the hotel. And you know you're in the right place because you look at the street sign and its name, Midin Road. And that's the view of the hotel at the back. On one trip, I'd been way, way out in the far remote end of the northwest part of the Solomons, and it was coming back down to Giza. We'd flown up to the northern part on a flight which goes up there once a week, arriving up there at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, and then there's nothing until the following week. And if you're just going up there for a meeting, well, you can have the meeting on the Monday when you get there, and then you're stuck there for a whole week. No, thank you. So you come by boat, small open boat with outboard motor, all the way down the New Georgia Sound, normally for a 3.5 to 4 hour trip, and get into the hotel. On this particular trip, the wind got up. We had the most horrendous Pacific breakers coming straight on the bow. We bounced along, it slowed us horrendously. It took us over 7 hours to get down to Gizo. You couldn't sit down because the seat was bouncing around too much. You started to bruise. So the only thing to do was stand up the entire trip, clinging onto the canopy over the cockpit. We arrived in that hotel, battered and bruised. I had a room on the ground floor beside the swimming pool, and those doors are patio doors that open onto the swimming pool. I had just put my laptop and my travel bag on the bed, opened the patio doors, and the earth moved. We've got another earthquake. We had a big earthquake, a serious earthquake, so serious that the contents of the pool then came into my room through the French doors, right across the tiled floor and out through the main door. Fortunately, everything I owned was on the bed, so it remained dry. As soon as the earthquake had finished, I thought there's only one thing to do. I'll have to go upstairs into the bar and make sure all the bottles are safe. Having flown up there, having arrived in Gizo, we're going out to Wagina. The only way is by boat. Crack of dawn, 4 o'clock in the morning, we're on the boat. The hill in the background is actually another volcano. And the boat we've got, no, it's not the yacht in the background. That's some visitors touring all the Melanesian, Polynesian islands. Ours is there in the foreground. That boat, you're going to be in it for 4 to 4.5 hours. And that's what it's like. They pack them with people, head off. You see the surf in the background pounding on the reef. You just have to make sure you're not getting close to the reef in one of those boats. And this is Wagina, the entrance to the harbour. And that's at low tide on a comparatively calm day. You can imagine trying to find the entrance to that harbour at high tide when there's a storm blowing. And of course you can't get any large vessels in there. So everything for these people in this area, in these villages, has to be taken by canoe out to the usual vessel and manhandled on board. And we're staying here for the night. This is our accommodation, Henry's bungalow. Well, at least we've got a balcony overlooking the marina. And the tin shed on the end, well, those are the ensuite facilities. There are 6 broken outboard motors in there, in various states of disrepair. And there's a lavatory pan. No cistern, no plumbing. Nothing but a pan which has been modified so everything drops through a hole in the floor into the creek and floats past your balcony. Welcome to Solomon Islands. Oh, and by the way, I didn't tell you, we're self-catering. Yes, unless you want fish and rice, which gets awfully monotonous, you bring everything with you from Gizo. So the day you arrive on the plane, you're straight round the supermarkets. Supermarkets, there's a laugh. You're straight round the 2 shops there, the Chinese shops, picking up tins of this, that and the other, stocking up the boat, and if you remember to pick up some ice-cold beer, it might be tepid by the time you get over there, so you can sit there watching the sun go down, and in the distance is that mountain, which is the volcano we came from round the other side. And why are we here? Well, we're going up the lagoon now to look at a project, a serious project. We're heading out to that island, and those black stripes on the seabed are seaweed. They're seaweed farmers, but it's a special sort of seaweed. This seaweed produces carrageenan. The seaweed is dried. The seaweed hangs there on ropes. It grows there, it's harvested, and it's dried in the sun, and then it's baled, and it's stable for 6 months. Carrageenan is used in the pharmaceutical industry. It goes into ice cream, it goes into soups, it goes into cosmetics. It's a very good thickener, much better than any synthetic thickener, and it's quite valuable. These people are growing the seaweed, but it has to go to either France or Belgium or the United States to be processed. So it's ideal for them. They can go out and tend their seaweed crop whenever it suits them. They're only waist deep in the water at the best of times. The entire family can get involved, and it's bringing in a reasonable source of income for them. This is the guy who was in charge of the seaweed cooperative there, and in 1 year he made $15,000 US. He's a Solomon Islands millionaire, but to be fair to this man, he wasn't doing it just for the money. His family, and they work on the basis of an extended family, he had a vast family, and he was educating 12 children in Honiara on condition that they came back on the boat every holiday and worked on the seaweed farm. The sad thing is, global warming is bringing up the sea level. The rising sea, the salt water, is beginning to kill off all the vegetation on that island, and I reckon that in another 10 years it will be totally uninhabitable. And you may remember these two people visiting Solomon Islands. They managed to arrive about 6 months after I finally left. And you wonder where Prince William is looking. Well, he's about to be presented with a garland by these young ladies. The gentleman nearest to me is my minister, a lovely man, totally down to earth, very helpful and very keen to develop rural Solomon Islands. However, he has one failing. Whenever we went out together to visit a project, there was always a cause for the celebration. Solomon Islands love the slightest excuse for a party. We arrived by boat, we were escorted ashore. Prince William might have got the younger nubile. That's what he and I used to get. I had words with him, but it fell on deaf ears. But the joy of the people for the merest celebration was fantastic. They dressed up to kill, glorious garlands with all the tropical flowers. Even the guy on the old plastic bucket base has got a garland of fresh flowers. And the celebration used to go on long into the night. The dancing girls, depends on which island as to what they wore. All have got different forms of local dress. And sometimes Solomon's answer to the full Monty with the pipe band. Lovely young ladies dancing there in front of you. And if you were thinking, well, she wouldn't make a bad wife, you know. Okay, I'll go and ask Granny. Granny would sit there looking at you and say, oh, well, yeah, you look all right. It's okay by me. Go and see the other Granny. And there's the other Granny sucking on her pipe, and she'd say, yes, but have you talked to anyone else? Well, go and talk to her mother. And Mother's there sucking on her pipe, because it's the women who smoke the pipes in Solomon Islands, not the men. And she'd say, have you spoken to her father? He's down the road. So you go and see her father, and he's wearing a nose plate so no evil can enter his mouth. He'd say, go and talk to her brothers. Well, there's one brother coming back from harvesting coconuts. He's got a machete in one hand, he's got 6 coconuts on his head. It's the best way to carry 6 coconuts. Well, I don't mind, he said. Go and see the other brother. So the other brother thinks, yeah, whew, I might get another bandana for the wedding. Go and talk to the junior brother. So you go off to talk to the junior brother, and there are 3 old ladies in the village falling about laughing because they know what's going to happen. The junior brother will take one look at you and... On that note, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for me to end with a little bit of pidgin. Tagio tumas, thank you too much.
That was wonderful, wasn't it? Thank you very much, Peter. When I first sat down and I thought, 69 days to Christmas, I should persuade the old man to take me to the South Pacific for it. But when the pictures all started coming up, I thought, yes, that's great, mobile. And then I realised no technology whatsoever. So that meant U3A would really be put on hold because my husband couldn't use his laptop. And then it meant that Mike, couldn't contact him. So I thought, well, that idea's out the window. So no, I won't be going to the South Pacific for Christmas. But I would like to say thank you very much for such a wonderful, interesting morning on your trip to the Solomon Islands.
You're most welcome.